My parents favored my sister my entire life until she discovered I had $15 million. She had a full-blown meltdown at Thanksgiving dinner, and Dad couldn't say a word. Can you imagine spending your entire life, your whole childhood, feeling like an invisible afterthought to your own family? While they were busy showering my average sister with endless praise and privilege, I was quietly building a multi-million-dollar empire in the shadows. And then, one Thanksgiving, my perfectly hidden world exploded, right over the turkey and stuffing. My name is Tanya, and for 32 years, I existed in my sister Audrey's shadow. It felt like no matter how hard I worked, no matter what I achieved, I was always the lesser daughter in my parents' eyes. They never knew that while they were busy celebrating Audrey's perfectly mediocre life, I was quietly amassing a $15 million fortune. And you know how it is with secrets like that? They eventually find a way to break free. This is where my story truly begins. Growing up in suburban Boston, our middle-class family looked picture-perfect on the outside. My dad, James, was an insurance adjuster, and my mom, Diana, taught third grade. We lived in a modest four-bedroom colonial, neat as a pin. But inside those walls, our family dynamic was anything but equal. From the moment Audrey was born 2 years before me, she was the golden child. I can still flip through old family photo albums and see entire books dedicated to Audrey's first steps, her first words, her first day of kindergarten. My milestones? They'd get a page or two, tucked into the back of her albums, almost as an afterthought. It was a constant, stinging reminder. The favoritism showed in a million small ways that accumulated like tiny, constant paper cuts over the years. When Audrey started dance lessons at age 6, my parents were front row at every recital. Flowers, dozens of photos, turning our living room into a shrine to her dancing with trophies and prominently displayed pictures. The summer I won the state science fair at age 12? They skipped the ceremony because Audrey had a dance competition the same day. My certificate ended up in a forgotten drawer in my bedroom. I remember the quiet sting, the way I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, even though it did. Christmas mornings were the same story. Audrey would unwrap expensive, specifically requested gifts. I'd get practical items or generic presents that screamed no real thought went into this. One year, it still stands out painfully, Audrey, 14, received a beautiful white gold necklace with a sapphire pendant that matched her eyes. I received a set of educational books about famous scientists. Don't get me wrong, I loved science. But the message was crystal clear: Audrey deserved beautiful things, while I should focus on being practical, on being smart. Even discipline was different. When Audrey broke curfew or lied about where she'd been, my parents would have a gentle conversation with her about making better choices. When I committed the exact same infractions, I was grounded immediately, often with extra chores piled on as punishment. The double standard was so obvious, so blatant, that even our neighbors started commenting on it. Our bedrooms told their own story of parental investment. Audrey's room was redecorated every few years to match her evolving interests: ballerinas, then pop stars, then a sophisticated teen retreat with a vanity. My room? Same pale yellow walls, same basic furniture from elementary school through high school. When I asked to paint my walls dark blue in 8th grade, my mother's instant reply was, "We don't have money for unnecessary changes right now." 2 weeks later, they surprised Audrey with a complete bedroom makeover. I remember staring at my plain yellow walls, a knot of quiet resentment tightening in my stomach. I learned early that the only path to any parental attention, however fleeting, ran through academic achievement. While Audrey was a solid B student who excelled socially, I pushed myself. I earned straight A's. I joined every academic club, entered every competition, stayed up late studying. My parents would acknowledge these achievements with distracted nods or comments like, "That's nice, but don't you want to try something fun like your sister?" The constant dismissal of my accomplishments could have broken my spirit. Instead, it forged something different in me, a fierce, unyielding independence. By 13, I stopped looking for their approval. I became self-sufficient, teaching myself to cook, managing my own schedule, finding my own rides to academic competitions. I watched Audrey continue to rely on our parents for everything: laundry, homework help, well into her high school years, and I just shook my head. The one person who truly saw me, who truly got me, was my grandmother, Elizabeth, my father's mother. Grandma Liz was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had worked as an accountant in an era when few women had careers. During my weekly visits to her house, she'd ask detailed questions about my academic interests and listen intently to my answers. She truly cared. I was 15 when Grandma Liz first started teaching me about money. While baking cookies in her kitchen one afternoon, she asked if I knew what compound interest was. When I shook my head, she pulled out a pad of paper and showed me how money could grow over time. That day changed my life. Over the next 3 years, she taught me everything she knew about investing, saving, and building wealth, lessons my parents never bothered to share with either of us. Your sister may be getting all the attention now, Grandma Liz told me once, her eyes twinkling. But you are the one with the mind for success. Remember, true wealth isn't flashy. The richest people in the room are rarely the ones showing it off. Her words became my mantra. My high school graduation should have been a day of triumph. I was valedictorian, had earned a full scholarship to State University, and was accepted into their prestigious business program. As I gave my speech from the podium, I spotted my family in the audience. My father was filming, but I later discovered the video was mostly of Audrey reacting to various moments, not of me speaking. At my graduation party, my parents spent most of the time telling relatives about Audrey's acceptance to an expensive private college, despite her mediocre grades. My accomplishments were mentioned as a brief aside. Oh, it was nice Tanya got that scholarship. She was always so practical. That night, a quiet, steely resolve settled in my heart. I made a promise to myself, someday, I would build a life so successful that it would be impossible to ignore. But even then, a part of me wondered if I would even want their recognition anymore. While Audrey headed off to Westfield University, a private college costing over $40,000 per year, I enrolled at State University on my full academic scholarship. The contrast in how our educations were supported couldn't have been more stark. My parents helped Audrey furnish her dorm room with new everything, coordinated bedding, a mini fridge, the latest laptop. They drove 6 hours to help her move in, staying the entire weekend. For my college move? My father dropped me off with my 2 suitcases and a box of second-hand supplies, saying, "Well, you've always been independent. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Call if you absolutely need anything." He was back in the car within 20 minutes, rushing home to help my mother prepare a care package for Audrey, who had been at college for just 2 weeks and was already homesick. I stood there, watching his car pull away, feeling a familiar ache of loneliness. When I called home that first semester, my parents always seemed distracted, eager to tell me about Audrey's social life and how she was adjusting. When I mentioned my 4.0 GPA after midterms, my mother simply said, "That's nice, honey. Did I tell you Audrey got invited to join the best sorority on campus?" It felt like a punch to the gut every single time. Financial disparities became even more apparent as college progressed. My parents contributed nothing to my education, reminding me I had a scholarship whenever money came up. Meanwhile, they not only paid Audrey's full tuition but also gave her a generous monthly allowance for spending money. I worked 3 jobs to cover my living expenses, morning shifts at the campus coffee shop, weekend hours at the library, and tutoring fellow students in economics and finance. Despite my packed work schedule, I maintained perfect grades and began to stand out in my business classes. During my sophomore year, Professor Lambert, who taught financial analysis, asked me to stay after class one day. "Miss Warren," he said, leaning against his desk, "I've been teaching for 25 years, and I rarely see the kind of aptitude for financial markets that you possess. Have you considered where you want to take this talent?" That conversation marked a major turning point. Professor Lambert became the mentor I had always needed, introducing me to industry contacts and recommending me for competitive internships. The summer after my junior year, I landed a position at Maxwell Investments, working directly under their chief strategy officer. While Audrey spent that summer backpacking through Europe on our parents' dime, I worked 60-hour weeks, absorbing everything I could about investment strategies and market analysis. I was exhausted, but I was alive. During my senior year, Grandma Liz passed away unexpectedly from a stroke. Her death devastated me in ways my parents couldn't understand. While they saw her as just family, I had lost my champion, my mentor, and the only person who had ever truly, fully believed in my potential. A month after the funeral, I received a letter from Grandma Liz's attorney. She had left me $50,000, her entire life savings. My parents were shocked. They had expected her modest estate to be divided equally among all family members. "You should consider sharing that with your sister," my father suggested over dinner, his voice low and pointed. "Audrey is thinking about graduate school, and that money could really help her." I looked at him incredulously. "Did Grandma Liz leave this money to Audrey?" He hesitated. "No, but family should support each other," my mother chimed in, almost offensively. "Your sister has expensive dreams, and you always manage just fine on your own." For the first time in my life, I flatly refused them. "This is my inheritance from the one person who supported my goals," I said, my voice shaking slightly with emotion. "I'm using it exactly as she would have wanted me to." And I did. I invested every penny of that inheritance using the principles Grandma Liz had taught me. It became the seed money for what would eventually grow into my fortune. After graduation, I accepted a position at Blackstone Financial in their emerging markets division. My starting salary was modest by New York standards, but the opportunity for growth was substantial. I lived in a tiny studio apartment with 3 roommates, spent absolutely nothing on luxuries, and invested 50% of every paycheck. During those early career years, I developed a reputation for spotting investment opportunities others missed. While my colleagues focused on traditional markets, I researched emerging technologies and sustainable energy companies before they became trendy investment sectors. By 26, I had saved enough to take a calculated risk. I left Blackstone and started my own investment firm, TWW Strategic Partners. The name was intentionally neutral, not broadcasting that a young woman was at the helm. I focused on a specific niche, identifying undervalued companies with innovative technologies and strong female leadership. My first major breakthrough came when I invested heavily in a woman-led biotech startup that had developed a revolutionary diagnostic tool. When the company was acquired the following year, my initial investment multiplied tenfold. By 27, my net worth had crossed the $1 million threshold, though no one in my family had any idea. I moved to a comfortable, but not flashy, apartment in New York and limited my contact with my family to holiday visits and occasional phone calls. During these interactions, my parents continued their lifelong pattern. Audrey, who had bounced between marketing jobs and was making a perfectly average salary, was praised endlessly for her creativity and social connections. My career was barely acknowledged. And when it was, my mother would say things like, "It's nice you found stable work, though it sounds awfully boring." At family gatherings, relatives would ask Audrey detailed questions about her life, while I received generic inquiries like, "Are you dating anyone?" When I mentioned my company was doing well, the conversation quickly shifted back to Audrey, who was excited about planning a trip to Bali that our parents were partially funding, despite her being 30 years old at the time. I stopped trying to share my successes. Instead, I created a fictional version of my life for family consumption. I worked at a regular finance job with regular hours and made a regular salary. It was easier than explaining the truth and watching their eyes glaze over, or worse, having them suddenly develop an interest in my life only because of money. Over the next 5 years, TWW Strategic Partners grew from a one-woman operation to a boutique investment firm with 15 employees and over $200 million under management. My investment strategy combined careful analysis with calculated risk-taking. I developed an algorithm that identified companies with strong fundamentals but temporarily depressed stock prices due to market overreactions. One of my biggest successes came from investing heavily in renewable energy storage companies just before major policy shifts made the sector explode. Another windfall resulted from identifying a pattern in consumer technology adoption that led me to invest in 3 obscure companies that were subsequently acquired by tech giants. By 30, my personal net worth had reached $5 million. By 32, that number had tripled to $15 million, placing me firmly in the top 1% of Americans my age. I owned a stunning apartment in Manhattan with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, vacationed in exclusive resorts, and could afford anything I wanted. Not that I spent lavishly. My grandmother's lessons about quiet wealth had stuck with me. Yet, to my family, I remained just Tanya who worked in finance. I carefully maintained this fiction through various strategies. I had a separate phone for family calls. I never posted about my business success on social media. When visiting my parents' home, I drove a rented Toyota rather than my Tesla. I wore simple clothing without designer labels, pulling my hair back in a ponytail and wearing minimal makeup to reinforce the image of someone focused on work rather than outward success. I had multiple reasons for maintaining this elaborate deception. First, I feared that if my parents knew about my wealth, they would immediately ask for money, not for themselves, but for Audrey. Throughout our adult lives, they had continued to support her financially whenever she faced challenges, from helping with her apartment deposits to bailing her out when she racked up credit card debt. Second, and perhaps more importantly, I didn't want to be suddenly valued only for my money after being overlooked my entire life. What would it say about our relationship if financial success was what finally earned me the attention and approval that had been denied? The thought made me feel sick to my stomach. Finally, years of emotional neglect had made me protective of my achievements. My success was mine alone, built without their support or encouragement. Some deep, wounded part of me didn't want to share it with the people who had never believed in me. In New York, I lived an entirely different life. I sat on the boards of tech startups, was featured in business publications, and attended exclusive industry events. I owned designer clothing and fine jewelry that I never wore around family. I dated successful men who understood ambition and drive. My two lives never intersected, and I became incredibly adept at switching between them. Last Christmas offered a perfect example of this performance. I flew home for 3 days, bringing modestly priced gifts and wearing simple jeans and sweaters. Throughout dinner, my parents gushed about Audrey's recent promotion to senior marketing manager at a local company, a position that likely paid less than what I spent annually on business travel. "Isn't it wonderful?" my mother said, squeezing Audrey's hand. "And they gave her a $5,000 bonus." I nodded and smiled, not mentioning that I'd donated 50 times that amount to a girls' coding initiative the previous week. When my father asked about my work, I gave a deliberately vague answer about projects going well, which prompted him to say, "Well, as long as you're stable, that's what matters." Not everyone needs to climb the corporate ladder. I had become so accustomed to this dynamic that it rarely bothered me anymore, or so I told myself. But that changed when I met Michael. A successful architect with his own firm, Michael saw through my carefully constructed walls from our very first date. After 3 months of dating, he asked the question no one had bothered to ask before: "Why do you downplay your success around your family?" The question caught me completely off guard. We were having dinner at my apartment, and I'd just finished a phone call with my mother in which I had once again deflected questions about my job with intentionally boring responses. "I don't downplay it," I said automatically. "They just aren't interested in finance." Michael gave me a knowing look. "Tanya, you're one of the most successful people I know. You manage hundreds of millions in assets. You've been profiled in Forbes. Yet you just told your mother that you had a normal day at the office checking spreadsheets." When I didn't respond, he continued, more gently, "I'm not judging you. I'm just curious about why you hide such a huge part of yourself from them." That night, I told Michael the full story of my childhood and the years of emotional neglect. He listened without interruption, and when I finished, he said something that resonated deeply. "Living 2 separate lives must be exhausting. At some point, don't you want to just be your whole self?" His question stayed with me for weeks. As Thanksgiving approached, I made a decision. I wouldn't dramatically announce my wealth or success, but I would stop actively hiding it. I would bring Michael home to meet my family, wear clothes I actually liked, and answer questions about my work honestly if asked. As a small step toward authenticity, I purchased a new television for my parents, a nice but not extravagant model. It was something they needed, as their current television was over 10 years old, and it represented a tiny fraction of what I could actually afford to give them. Still, it was more expensive than my usual generic gifts, and I felt both nervous and excited about this small step toward honesty. The drive from New York to Boston on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving filled me with a familiar anxiety, despite Michael's reassuring presence. As we pulled onto my parents' street, I immediately noticed Audrey's new Audi parked in the driveway, a car I knew my parents had helped her finance despite her supposed career success. "Showtime," I muttered to Michael as we parked on the street and gathered our bags. The television, wrapped in tasteful silver paper with a blue bow, sat in the back seat, waiting for Wednesday. The moment we stepped through the front door, the family dynamic established itself with painful predictability. My mother rushed past me to hug Michael, thrilled at meeting my successful boyfriend, while my father gave me a distracted pat on the shoulder before calling out, "Audrey, Tanya is here." Audrey swept into the room like she was making an entrance on stage. At 34, my sister still carried herself with the confident air of someone who had been told her whole life that she was special. Her dark blonde hair was freshly highlighted, her makeup flawless. "Tanya," she exclaimed, giving me a quick hug that barely made contact. She turned immediately to Michael, assessing him with obvious approval. "So, you're the famous Michael. Mom says you're an architect." While Michael handled the introductions with grace, I glanced around the living room. New photos of Audrey and her husband Brad dominated the mantel, including several from their vacation to Hawaii that our parents had contributed to as an anniversary gift. I spotted exactly one photo of me, a 5-year-old graduation picture tucked on a side table. My chest tightened. Dinner that evening was a masterclass in subtle favoritism. My mother had prepared all of Audrey's favorite foods, including the labor-intensive Swedish meatballs she loved. When I offered to help in the kitchen, my mother said, "No need, honey. Audrey already set the table so beautifully." The dinner conversation revolved entirely around Audrey's recent promotion. She waved her hands dramatically as she described her new office with a window view and her team of 2 junior marketers who reported to her. "It's just such a validation, you know," she said, sipping her wine. "All those years of networking and relationship building are finally paying off. They specifically told me my people skills were why I got the position." My parents nodded enthusiastically throughout her story. When Brad mentioned that the promotion came with only a modest raise, my father immediately said, "Well, you know, We can help out if you need to upgrade some things for your new position. First impressions matter in business. No one asked about my work until dessert, when my mother turned to me and said, "And how's your job going? Tanya's still doing the spreadsheet thing?" Before I could answer, Audrey jumped in. She wouldn't know what to do with a promotion anyway. She laughed. Remember how she always hated being the center of attention? She's happier behind a desk. The casual dismissiveness, the outright mocking, it burned. Later that evening, I discovered that Michael and I had been assigned to the small guest room with the lumpy pull-out sofa, while Audrey and Brad got the master guest suite with the queen bed and attached bathroom. When I mentioned this to my mother, she seemed genuinely confused by my objection. Audrey and Brad are used to a certain standard of living, she explained, as if that was justification enough. And you know your sister has back problems. Besides, you've always been less fussy about accommodations. That night, as Michael and I tried to get comfortable on the ancient sofa bed, he whispered, "Are they always like this?" "Actually," I replied, only half joking, "they're on better behavior because you're here." The next morning, Thanksgiving Day, I overheard a conversation that confirmed nothing had changed despite my adult success. I was coming down the hallway when I heard my name mentioned in the kitchen. I paused, just out of sight. "I just don't understand why Tanya hasn't progressed more in her career," my mother was saying. "She was always so good at math and those analytical things." "Some people just don't have ambition," my father replied. "She's always been content with less, not like Audrey, always striving for more." Then Audrey sighed dramatically. "I feel bad for her sometimes. And now she's brought this really successful guy home. I googled him, you know. His architecture firm does huge projects. I give it 6 months before he realizes she's not at his level." I stood frozen, their words cutting deeper than they should have, given how often I'd heard similar sentiments. But hearing it through their eyes, hearing them pity me, it was a whole new kind of pain. Michael found me there, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "Let's go for a walk." Outside in the crisp November air, I finally let the tears fall. "It's been like this my whole life," I choked out. "Nothing I do is ever enough. And now they're pitying me because they think you're too successful for me." Michael stopped walking and turned to face me. "You know what I think," he said, his eyes kind but firm. "I think it's time they knew exactly who you're hiding." Later that afternoon, while helping my mother prepare the Thanksgiving meal, I took a business call I couldn't avoid. One of our major investments was finalizing, and my input was required. I stepped into the backyard for privacy, speaking confidently about million-dollar figures and strategy adjustments. I didn't realize Audrey had followed me outside until I ended the call and turned to find her standing by the back door, her expression suspicious. "Who was that?" she asked. Sounded pretty intense for someone who just does data entry or whatever. "Just work stuff," I said, attempting to move past her into the house. She blocked my path. "Since when do data analysts talk about investment portfolios and 7-figure returns? What's your job, actually?" Before I could formulate a response, my mother called us both inside to help set the table. Audrey gave me a long, calculating look before turning away. But I knew the conversation wasn't over. My carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel, and I felt both terrified and strangely relieved. The final thread snapped when Michael, making casual conversation with Brad, mentioned our upcoming trip to Tokyo. "Tanya has a new client there," he explained. "But we're extending the trip to explore the city. I've never been, but Tanya goes a few times a year for work." I saw Audrey's head snap up from across the room, her eyes narrowing as she processed this new information that contradicted everything I'd told them about my modest career. As we moved toward the dining room for the Thanksgiving meal, I could feel the tension building like a thunderstorm on the horizon. The dining room looked like a scene from a traditional holiday movie. My mother had used her best tablecloth, the one with embroidered fall leaves my grandmother had given her years ago. The good china, which only appeared for special occasions, was set precisely at each place. A golden turkey sat in the center of the table, surrounded by all the classic sides. My father said a brief grace, thanking God for family and abundance, words that felt strangely prophetic given what was about to unfold. The first 15 minutes proceeded pleasantly enough, with the usual comments about how moist the turkey was and reminiscences about Thanksgivings past. My mother directed most of her questions to Audrey and Brad, asking about their plans to renovate their kitchen and whether they were still considering starting a family soon. Audrey just turned 34. "Plenty of time still," my mother said, squeezing my sister's hand, "but grandchildren would be such a blessing." No one mentioned that I was 32 and might also be considering family planning. Michael caught my eye across the cranberry sauce and gave me an encouraging smile. As the initial hunger was satisfied and plates were being refilled, my father turned to Michael with genuine interest. So, tell us more about this architecture firm of yours. Your website looks impressive. What kind of projects do you typically handle? While Michael described a recent museum renovation his firm had completed, I slipped away to retrieve the wrapped television from the car. Returning to the dining room, I placed the large package against the wall and rejoined the table. What's that? My mother asked, noticing the gift. Just a little something for you and Dad, I said, trying to sound casual. An early Christmas present, but I thought you might enjoy it for the holiday football games. When dinner wound down, I brought the package to my parents. They looked surprised, as my gifts were typically small and practical, books or kitchen gadgets that cost under $50. My father tore away the wrapping paper to reveal a 55-inch smart television. Not the most expensive model available, but certainly a significant upgrade from their ancient set. His eyebrows shot up as he read the specifications on the box. Tanya, this is too much, my mother said, looking confused. This must have cost a fortune. It was on sale, I lied instinctively, then caught myself. Actually, it wasn't. I wanted to get you something nice. How can you afford something like this? My father asked, his tone somewhere between concerned and suspicious. These are over $1,000. I do all right at work, I said carefully, testing the waters. Audrey, who had been examining the box with narrowed eyes, pulled out her phone. The model number was visible on the package, and I realized with a sinking feeling what she was doing. $1,500, she announced after a quick search. Tanya, that's more than a month's rent for some people. Since when can you afford gifts like this on a mid-level analyst salary? I felt Michael's hand on my knee under the table, a silent show of support. Taking a deep breath, I decided to wade into the truth. I've actually been doing very well at work, I began. My company has expanded significantly over the past few years, and I'm in a leadership position now. Leadership? Audrey snorted. Last Christmas, you told us you were still doing the same job you'd started with. I simplified things, I admitted. The truth is, I own my own investment firm. We're quite successful. A confused silence fell over the table. My father stared at me as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. My mother looked to Audrey as if seeking her interpretation of this bombshell. What are you talking about? Audrey demanded. You've never mentioned owning a company. While this uncomfortable conversation was unfolding, Audrey's thumbs were busy on her phone. I realized she was Googling me. And unlike previous years, I had made no effort to ask professional publications to use my middle name or avoid photographs in recent profiles. The color drained from Audrey's face as she stared at her screen. Then, in a sudden movement that made everyone jump, she slammed her phone down on the table and stood up. Tanya Warren, CEO of TWW Strategic Partners, she read from her screen, her voice rising with each word. A boutique investment firm managing over $200 million in assets, featured in Forbes 30 Under 30 Finance Edition, named one of New York's most influential women in business last year. She looked up from her phone, her face contorted with disbelief and growing rage. All these years, you've been what? Secretly rich while we've been struggling to make mortgage payments and I had to beg Mom and Dad for help with our car loan? I remained calm, though my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm. It's not a secret, exactly. It's just not something I discussed with family. Not something you discussed? Audrey was nearly screaming now. You let us think you were some ordinary office worker while you're apparently worth. She glanced back at her phone, and her eyes widened further. Oh my God. $15 million. The dining room went completely silent. My father sat frozen, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth, completely speechless. My mother made a small choking sound and reached for her water glass with a trembling hand. $15 million. Audrey repeated, her voice now a dangerous whisper. All these years, Mom and Dad have been helping me while you sat on a fortune. How selfish can you possibly be? The sheer unfairness of this accusation finally broke through my composed exterior. Selfish? I responded, my voice level but intense, a fire starting to burn in my gut. I've been selfish? Yes, selfish. Audrey was in full meltdown now, pacing beside the table. Do you know what we could have done with that money? Brad and I have wanted to buy a house for years. Mom and Dad had to dip into their retirement to help us with basic expenses, and you're just hoarding millions. My parents were still shell-shocked, unable to intervene as their golden child continued her tirade. How much exactly do you have? Audrey demanded. Is it really $15 million? And you've never once offered to help your family? What kind of person does that make you? Michael started to speak, but I placed my hand on his arm. This was my battle. What kind of person does that make me? I repeated, rising slowly to my feet. My voice was calm, but every word was infused with years of pent-up emotion. Let me tell you exactly what kind of person I am, Audrey. I'm the kind of person who has been overlooked her entire life by her own family. I'm the daughter whose academic achievements were ignored while your dance recitals were treated like Broadway productions. I am the sister who got used clothes while you got designer labels, who got educational books for Christmas while you got jewelry. I turned to my parents, whose expressions had shifted from shock to a dawning, uncomfortable realization. I'm the daughter who worked 3 jobs in college while you paid Audrey's full tuition and gave her spending money, I continued, my voice gaining strength. I'm the child whose graduation speech you barely watched because you were too busy filming Audrey's reactions. I am the person who built a multi-million-dollar company from scratch, with no support, no encouragement, and not a single word of pride from either of you. Brad was staring at his plate, clearly mortified. My mother had tears streaming down her face. My father still hadn't spoken, his mouth slightly open as if the words were stuck somewhere in his throat. And now, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion coursing through me, now that you've discovered I have money, suddenly I'm interesting. Suddenly, I'm important enough to acknowledge. What does that say about our family? Audrey seemed momentarily stunned by my response, but quickly recovered. This isn't about childhood petty jealousy, Tanya, she snapped. This is about basic family obligation. You owe us. I don't owe anyone anything, I replied, the words feeling like pure liberation. The money I have, I earned through my own hard work and strategic decisions. Just like the attention you receive all our lives was something you never had to earn. It was simply given to you. That's completely different. Audrey shouted, her face flushed with anger. Mom and Dad were just being parents. Of course, they were proud of me. But money? Real money? That's something you share with family. Like you shared your parents' attention and love with me? I asked quietly, my gaze piercing. My mother finally found her voice. Tanya, we never meant to make you feel less loved, she said weakly. We just thought Audrey needed more support. You were always so capable, so independent. I was independent because I had to be, I replied, refusing to soften the truth. I was capable because no one else was going to do things for me. My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. $15 million, he whispered. How is that even possible? I made smart investments, I said simply. Starting with Grandma Liz's $50,000 that you wanted me to give to Audrey for grad school. Audrey wasn't finished. So, what happens now, she demanded. Are you going to help your family or continue being selfish? Brad and I could use a down payment for a house. Mom and Dad should be able to retire comfortably. That's what family does for each other. Michael, who had remained respectfully silent throughout most of the confrontation, finally spoke up. From what I've observed today, Tanya has been giving to this family her entire life, just not financially. Perhaps it's time someone gave something back to her, like basic respect. Nobody asked you, Audrey snapped at him. I think we're done here, I said, placing my napkin on the table with a decisive thud. Michael and I will be staying at a hotel tonight. You're just going to walk out? Audrey was incredulous. After dropping this bomb on us? Typical Tanya, always thinking about herself. As I gathered my coat, I turned for one last look at my family. My father still seemed incapable of forming complete sentences. My mother was crying silently. Brad looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. And Audrey stood with her fists clenched, years of entitlement crashing against the sudden, devastating realization that her overlooked sister had surpassed her in the most tangible way society measures success. Thanksgiving dinner was over. The turkey half-eaten, the pumpkin pie untouched. As Michael and I walked to the door, I heard Audrey call after me. This conversation isn't over, Tanya. You can't just hide your money from your family and pretend that's okay. But I was already stepping into the cool November air, feeling lighter than I had in years. The Marriott hotel room felt like a sanctuary after the explosive dinner. Michael ordered room service while I sat on the edge of the bed, alternating between bouts of relieved laughter and moments of quiet disbelief. I can't believe that just happened, I said for perhaps the 10th time. Did you see my father's face? I have never, in 32 years, seen him speechless. Michael sat beside me, handing me a glass of wine from the room service tray. You were magnificent, he said, completely dignified, while your sister had a full-blown tantrum over money that isn't hers. The aftermath began almost immediately. My phone buzzed with text messages and calls, first from Audrey, then my mother, even Brad. I silenced it and placed it face down on the nightstand. They'll have to wait until tomorrow, I said. I'm emotionally exhausted. That night, curled against Michael's chest in the hotel bed, I experienced a strange mix of emotions. There was sorrow for the family relationship I had never truly had, anger at years of dismissal, but predominantly, an overwhelming sense of release. The secret I carried for so long was finally out. And while the revelation had been chaotic, there was freedom in no longer hiding. Morning brought a flood of notifications. Audrey had sent 17 text messages overnight, a roller coaster of emotions ranging from furious, "How dare you walk out on us," to apologetic, "I am sorry I yelled. But you have to understand how shocking this was," to entitled, "We need to talk about how your money can help the family," and back to angry, "Your silence is so immature and selfish." My mother had called 4 times and left tearful voicemails asking me to please come back to the house so we could talk things through. Brad had sent a single awkward text, apologizing for the dinner disaster and claiming he had no part in Audrey's expectations. My father had neither called nor texted. I was in the shower when a knock came at the hotel room door. Michael answered it to find my father standing in the hallway, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his face haggard from what appeared to be a sleepless night. "I need to speak with my daughter," he said. I emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a hotel robe, my wet hair dripping onto my shoulders. "Dad," I said, surprised to see him there. "How did you find us?" "There's only 3 hotels in town," he replied, a weak attempt at humor. This was my second stop. "The Hilton sends their regards." Michael excused himself to get coffee from the lobby, giving us privacy. My father sat heavily in the desk chair while I perched on the edge of the bed. For nearly a full minute, he said nothing, just stared at his hands. $15 million, he finally said, shaking his head. I still can't wrap my head around it. "It's not about the money, Dad," I said quietly. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. "I know," he replied, surprising me. "It's about how we treated you. How we've always treated you." The simple acknowledgement caught me completely off guard. I'd expected defensiveness, justifications, perhaps even anger that I'd concealed my success. The admission nearly brought tears to my eyes. "I wasn't a good father to you," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I told myself that Audrey needed more attention, more support, more everything. She was always so dramatic, so demanding. You were quiet, capable, smart. I thought that meant you needed less from us. But that wasn't fair to you." "No, it wasn't," I agreed, unwilling to soften the truth to make him feel better. "Your mother and I, we fell into a pattern early on. Audrey would cry and throw tantrums if she didn't get what she wanted. You would just adapt, find another way. We took the path of least resistance, and you suffered for it." He ran a hand over his face. "When you were 10, you won that science competition at school. Do you remember? You built that solar system model that actually moved." I remembered. I'd spent weeks on that project, carefully calculating the relative distances and sizes of the planets, building a motor from a kit to make them rotate. I won first place, but my family had already left when they called my name. "There's been 1,000 moments like that," I said, the bitterness tinging my voice. 1,000 times when my achievements were brushed aside while Audrey's mediocrity was celebrated. He winced but didn't argue. "You're right. And now you've become more successful than we could have imagined, and we missed it. We missed your whole journey. Would it have mattered if I wasn't successful?" I asked, looking him directly in the eye. If I was just an ordinary analyst making a decent living, would we be having this conversation, or would Audrey still be the center of the family universe? He had no answer for that. Our conversation was interrupted by my ringing phone, my mother calling again. I declined the call, but moments later, my father's phone rang. He answered, speaking in low tones, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable. "They're at the house," he said after hanging up. "Your mother and Audrey. They want to talk to you. All of us, as a family, about my money," I guessed, feeling a surge of weariness. He couldn't meet my eyes, which was answer enough. When Michael returned, I filled him in on the conversation. "Is it worth going back there?" he asked, concerned. "You don't owe them another confrontation." I thought about it carefully. Part of me wanted to check out of the hotel and drive straight back to New York, leaving the mess behind. But another part, the part that had spent a lifetime seeking acknowledgement from my family, wanted resolution. "I think I need to finish this," I said. "Set boundaries once and for all." Back at my parents' house, I found my mother and Audrey waiting in the living room. My mother rushed forward to hug me, but I stepped back, maintaining distance. "Let's just talk," I said. Audrey had clearly been crying, her makeup smudged and her eyes puffy, but the set of her jaw told me she was far from accepting the situation. "I want to apologize for how I reacted yesterday," she began, her voice controlled. It was a shock, finding out my sister is secretly wealthy while we've been struggling. I've watched you take family support your entire adult life, I replied. College tuition, help with rent, car payments, vacations. Even now at 34, you expect mom and dad to subsidize your lifestyle. I never asked for or received a dime. That's different, she insisted. They offered that help because they love me. And because I didn't need it, I don't deserve the same love? I asked. My mother interjected, her voice pleading. We love you both the same, Tanya. We just showed it differently. You didn't show it to me at all, I said flatly, the truth finally coming out without reservation. My entire childhood is a case study in favoritism. That's not fair, my mother protested. We were present for you, too. Name one of my achievements that you celebrated as enthusiastically as Audrey's dance recital, I challenged. One time you put my needs before hers. The silence was damning. Audrey, growing frustrated with the direction of the conversation, cut to her real concern. Look, what happened in the past is done. We're adults now. The question is, what are you going to do to help your family now that we know you can? The entitlement in her voice was staggering. Nothing, I said, simply. Nothing, she repeated, incredulous. You have $15 million and you're doing nothing for your family? What have you ever done for me? I asked. Besides compete for attention, dismiss my accomplishments, and now demand access to my money? That's what families do, Tanya, she nearly shouted. They support each other. Yes, they do, I agreed. But this isn't support you're asking for. It's entitlement to something you didn't earn. If mom and dad needed medical care or were losing their house, that's different. But you want my money because you think you deserve a better lifestyle than you've earned yourself. The conversation deteriorated from there. Audrey became increasingly hostile, alternating between guilt trips, outright demands, and finally, threats to cut me out of the family if I didn't share my wealth. My mother wept and pleaded for peace while failing to address the core issues. My father sat in silence, occasionally attempting to moderate, but mostly looking defeated. After an hour of circular arguments that resolved nothing, Michael and I gathered our belongings and prepared to leave. As we headed for the door, my father followed us outside to the car. I'm sorry, he said simply, for everything. For 32 years of getting it wrong. I nodded, unable to formulate a response that encompassed the complexity of my feelings. We drove back to New York that afternoon, 3 days earlier than planned. During the long drive, Michael and I talked through everything that had happened. You handled that with incredible grace, he said as we crossed the state line into New York. Most people would have either caved to the pressure or completely burned bridges. I don't know if the bridges aren't burned anyway, I sighed. I can't imagine Thanksgiving will be on the calendar next year. Maybe that's not a bad thing, he suggested gently. Family should lift you up, not tear you down. Sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. The week after Thanksgiving brought continued fallout. My parents called daily, their approach evolving from defending Audrey to slowly acknowledging their role in creating the family dynamic. My father especially seemed to be genuinely reflecting on his behavior. I don't think I ever really saw you, he said during one call. I was so busy managing Audrey's needs that I missed who you actually were. I'm proud of you, Tanya. Not because of the money, but because you built something remarkable despite having parents who failed you. My mother struggled more to accept responsibility, often falling back on, but we loved you both, or Audrey just needed more attention. Still, I could sense a gradual shift in her perspective, small cracks in the narrative she'd maintained for decades. Audrey took a different approach. After several days of angry messages that I didn't respond to, she began reaching out to extended family, sharing a distorted version of events that cast me as a greedy, selfish sister who refused to help family in need. Cousins and aunts I barely spoke to started sending messages expressing disappointment in my materialism. I've never asked you for money before, wrote my cousin Stephanie, whom I hadn't seen in 5 years, but my son really wants to go to soccer camp this summer. And since you're obviously loaded. I deleted the messages without responding. The people who actually knew me understood the situation. The ones who only reached out when money was involved confirmed exactly why I'd kept my success private for so long. 6 months after the Thanksgiving meltdown, spring had brought new growth both in the natural world and in my personal life. The immediate aftermath had been painful, but the enforced honesty had ultimately created space for healing, even if that healing looked different than I might have once hoped. I began seeing Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, a therapist specializing in family trauma, who helped me process the complex emotions surrounding my childhood and the recent confrontation. Your success triggered a family system that was built on specific roles, she explained during one session. You were assigned the role of the self-sufficient, overlooked child. Audrey was the needy, celebrated child. Your parents were the providers who focused their resources where they perceived the greatest need. When you revealed your success, you shattered those roles, and the entire family system destabilized. Through therapy, I came to understand that while I couldn't change my past or my family's behavior, I could set clear boundaries going forward. I drafted an email to my entire family outlining these boundaries. I would not discuss my finances, I would not provide funding for Audrey's lifestyle, and I would only participate in family gatherings where my achievements and personhood were respected equally to my sisters. The response to these boundaries varied dramatically. Audrey essentially cut contact, sending a final, scathing message accusing me of destroying the family with my selfishness. I blocked her number the same day, a decision that brought immediate relief. My relationship with my parents evolved into something more limited, but also more honest. We spoke on the phone every few weeks, carefully avoiding topics that would trigger old patterns. My father made genuine efforts to show interest in my life and work, asking thoughtful questions about my company and acknowledging my expertise. I truly didn't understand what you were building, he told me during one call. I just assumed when you said finance, you meant some entry-level position pushing papers. I'm sorry, I never asked for details. My mother found the adjustment more difficult. She continued to bring up Audrey, frequently lamenting the rift between us sisters and occasionally suggesting that a financial gift from me might help heal the relationship. Mom, I said firmly during one such conversation. My relationship with Audrey was broken long before money entered the picture. I'm not using my resources to buy a fake sisterhood. After careful consideration, I did make one financial decision regarding my family. I established an educational trust fund for Audrey's children, my niece and nephew, that would cover their college expenses when they came of age. The trust was structured so that the money could only be used for education, with no possibility of Audrey accessing it for other purposes. When I told my parents about the trust, my father expressed genuine gratitude. That's incredibly generous, Tanya, especially given everything that's happened, he said. I love those kids, I replied simply. Their future shouldn't be limited by adult conflicts. My relationship with Michael deepened throughout this period of family upheaval. He had seen me at my most vulnerable and most powerful, witnessing both the wounds of my childhood and the strength that developed in response to them. 6 months after Thanksgiving, he proposed during a weekend trip to the Berkshires, presenting a vintage emerald ring that couldn't have been more perfect if I designed it myself. Do you think we'll have kids someday? He asked as we lay in bed that night, my head on his chest, the new ring catching the moonlight streaming through the window. I think so, I replied, surprised by how much I wanted that future with him. But we'll do better than my parents did. We'll love each child for exactly who they are, not who needs us most. In many ways, the most profound healing came through building what Michael had called my chosen family. My close friends, particularly those who'd known about my success all along, provided the unconditional support I never found at home. We celebrated holidays together, created new traditions, and built connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation or history. Perhaps the most unexpected development was my changing relationship with money itself. For years, my wealth had been a secret source of validation, concrete proof that I'd succeeded despite my family's lack of faith in me. After the confrontation, I began to see it differently, not as a scorecard, but simply as a tool that provided security and options. I increased my philanthropic giving, focusing particularly on organizations that supported young women in finance and technology. I mentored aspiring female entrepreneurs, sharing both knowledge and, in some cases, seed funding for promising ventures. The joy I found in helping others build their dreams far surpassed the hollow satisfaction of accumulating wealth in secret. By the time the next Thanksgiving approached, I had learned several profound lessons from the experience. First, honesty, while sometimes painful, is ultimately less exhausting than pretense. Living a double life had consumed enormous emotional energy that I could now direct toward more fulfilling pursuits. Second, money doesn't create character flaws, it reveals them. Those who had always valued me continued to do so regardless of my financial status. Those who suddenly showed interest when they learned of my wealth had always been transactional in their approach to relationships. Third, and perhaps most importantly, I learned that my worth was never dependent on my family's recognition. I'd spent decades seeking validation from people who were constitutionally unable to provide it. That recognition had to come from within, from knowing my own value, regardless of external affirmation. The journey wasn't over, of course. Family systems don't transform overnight, and old wounds don't heal completely in a matter of months. But I had found a path forward that honored both my past experiences and my future possibilities. I had stopped allowing myself to be defined by what my family couldn't give me and started embracing what I could create for myself. I will always be the girl who grew up in her sister's shadow, but I also became the woman who stepped into her own light. And that, in itself, was a story worth $15 million. So, I've told you my story. What would you have done in my shoes? Have you ever felt overlooked, or had to fight for recognition from your own family? Let me know in the comments below. I truly want to hear your thoughts.